My name is Michael Prentice. I am the AngularJS material lead and a contributor to Angular material. I've spent a lot of time over the last year supporting users with disabilities and fixing accessibility issues. I also run a software consulting company called DevIntent. I work with clients building apps with Angular Material, Firebase, and Google Cloud. This has given me a lot of insight and experience with useful patterns for business applications using material design. So we're going to cover a lot of topics today. We'll start by digging into some of the existing schematics from the Angular material team. This includes new schematics in Angular v7, along with new schematics in the CDK, which is the component dev kit. Then we'll look at some examples of integrating Angular material components together. And I'll cover an experimental new library that I've recently published. And then we'll dig into some accessibility testing demos and guidance. So Angular material provides an add and an update schematic. These help developers get started and make updating versions painless. We put out scripts in the past for converting things like the MD prefix to the MAT prefix. But now with schematics built into the CLI, there's an official channel for providing these kind of migration tools. Our component schematics were mostly created by Austin McDaniel, and Paul, his GitHub handle is devversion. These schematics are built as simple functional demonstrations of some of our key components. We found that it's often easier to start by modifying a fully functional component rather than wiring up everything yourself. This can avoid something like a typo breaking your attempts at building and integrating a data table. Finally, our schematics are built to be accessible and demonstrate some of our best practices. In order to save a little bit of time, I'm going to walk through some existing demo code rather than live coding everything from scratch. So we talked about ng update. So I've got the commands here just so I don't have any Wi-Fi issues. But you can see at the top, I ran ng update just with no arguments. So if you run that, it will actually analyze your project and tell you which of your libraries that support ng update need an update. It'll list them. It'll tell you the command to update it. And then you can see here that I just ran ng update, Angular core, Angular CDK, and material. Let's see. Oh, and yeah. Should be CLI here. I had to do it twice. OK, so that will actually update everything. It will make changes to your package JSON to change the versions, but it will also change some of your code, doing a code migration if that's needed. And then it'll run npm here, get everything installed after it makes those changes. Then you can run ng update again, and it will tell you everything looks good, you're ready to go. So just to quickly look at what kind of changes it made. You can see the usual, change some library versions. But then in our tsconfig here, it actually made a modification here. One of the libraries, I don't know exactly which one, has said we need this TypeScript config. We want these helpers to be imported. So you don't have to worry about that. It will just automatically migrate you. Additionally, there was some minor changes to the drag and drop component. So it goes in, takes care of that, and makes in this case, it's CDK drop list instead of CDK drop. So those are the kind of changes it'll make. And you definitely want to check everything into Git before you run ng update so that you can sort of atomically see exactly what changed. OK. And then in the demo itself, so I've just got, at the root app component, I just have an app nav. So this nav component is actually one of the schematics. So we can run ng add @Angular material nav, and then tell it to generate us a nav component. So what that gives us is a side nav, and it gives us some of the behaviors. It'll give us these sort of is handset here. It's checking for responsive attributes and things like that, automatically sets that up for you. And then it leaves this blank, but since this demo is already done, I've already added in the other schematics that we have. So dashboard, tree, an address form, app table, or a table, a data table, and then drag and drop. So let's take a look at that real quick. So this is what the demo app looks like if you just sort of integrate all the schematics together. There's no data behind it or anything, just some sort of mock data, which we'll see in a second. So I have this side nav here. It has some responsiveness. If I drop it over, I get a side nav that pops out on a smaller screen. And then I have a dashboard inside the nav. Oh. Okay. I'll just move this over there. That look good? Okay, so dashboard gives you a set of cards that are responsive as well. Then we've got a tree here. So you have a nice little tree with some canned data behind it. You get an address form, so you've got a bunch of inputs. You've got a select, you've got some basic validation in here. Then we have a data table. So we got a data table that's got sorting. And so this will hook up your data source and all that kind of stuff to show you how to kind of plumb it up, and then you just have to change out the data types and the data itself. We also have a drag and drop, so this is new in the latest CDK. You can drag between lists, you can drag within a list, and there's some nice directives in there to make it really easy to drag and drop between these sorts of lists, to handle multiple drop areas, and all sorts of interesting drag and drop functionality. So go back over here. So this is a dashboard, what it generates for you. It's using a grid tile and a grid list. It's also using some of these like mat cards along with the headers, the titles, the buttons in a menu here. It sets up the menu for you. So it plumbs up a lot of this stuff so you can see exactly how to hook these things together. You have a good example to start from. And in this case, we have a little bit of data here, but it's based on this breakpoint observer. So we're checking this handset breakpoint, which I can't see the definition here, but there's some 640 pixel or some sort of value that's that this is defined by. Then for a data table, it'll set up your data table. You just pass it in a data source, and it will actually set up your data source for you. So that's one of the more complicated things with setting up a data table is the data source is an actual TypeScript object interface that you have to implement all these methods to handle sorting and things like that. Also, it adds in a paginator for you. So the actual table component is pretty simple. It's just really hooking up the data source. But that's where the interesting things are. And we have some code, some comments in here to explain. We've got some data table types. And then we've implemented some of these functions for you to show you what you need to do, like connect, disconnect, getting a certain page of data, and then sorting, as well as having a comparator function down here. So that is nice to be able to kind of just generate a data table that you already have a lot of this boilerplate ready to go, and you just need to change some data types. And then for the drag and drop component, there's also some other things here you have to set up, like the drop list, the data, There's some connected to callbacks here, some events. And then there's the actual draggable. So this CD key drag is saying that this item is draggable, and you could then drag it and you could drop it into a drop list. So then the code in the component for this is pretty simple. We have a couple data sets, and then we provide a move item in array or transfer item array, transfer array item. So move is like basically moving it up and down in the same list, and transfer is taking it from one drop list to another. And we have some convenience methods here to make that easy. So just some of the things that save you a little bit of time if you're starting off with one of these components. Okay. And so those are schematics available today from the Angular material team. There are plans for more in the future. But you can start building your own schematics that are purpose-built for your company today. Please contact me after this talk if you want to get some pointers, some resources for building custom schematics. I've done another talk that's on a deep dive into schematics and building schematics, and there's a lot of great ebooks and other resources out there. So last year I provided a bunch of Stack Blitz demos for combining Angular material components to build enterprise applications. I'm just going to go through a few of these examples right now for people who maybe didn't see that talk. So this is similar to the top app bar pattern in material design, where an overflow menu is used to nest the options that don't fit on the page. This is important to business applications, as there are often a lot of options and menu items and actions. This is something you might see on Android as well. They have a lot of an overflow behavior like this. But the button bar starts with the best discoverability on desktop, and that's through using button names. So you can make things icon buttons, but a lot of times users don't know what that icon means. So by showing the name, it's really obvious to people. But if you're low on space, you can shrink it down using icon buttons on mobile. And here's the full discoverable desktop version. And then another example here is a top nav menu. So enterprise developers should feel pretty familiar with this system of nested menus and a toolbar. The documentation for Angular material doesn't cover using nested menus with dynamic data. So I have an example here where you can just pass in some JSON and it will generate out your menu structure, which is pretty handy, especially if you have multiple different kinds of apps, or if you have like roles and things where certain menu items shouldn't show up for certain users. You can implement that here. And then you might have seen on the previous example, we have a bunch of nested menus. That won't work really well on small screens like phones. In that case, you may want to move your nav into a side nav. And then I have an example here. And in the slides, I have the Stack Blitz link, so you can just click on it, load it in Stack Blitz, and start playing with it. With the same JSON data structure on a smaller device, you can have this side nav with animations and everything. So just a few examples. So those are up there on Stack Blitz. You can play with them. You can copy the code out of there and use it. But thanks to the improved tooling support for authoring libraries and improvements to schematics in the CLI, I've started moving these demos into a library and a schematics package. Not quite all the way there yet with as much time as I'd hoped. I'd hoped to have all three of those in there, but I got one. So I have a library out there. It's published on NPM. It's experimental. It shows how to author a third-party library, which integrates with Angular material theming. It shows how to combine and compose different material elements or components into a higher level component. So a button bar is made up of quite a few different things. Additionally, it demonstrates how to package and publish a library on NPM using the latest Angular CLI. So currently, the library just has the button bar. The theming integration was just released this month. So you're able to take your existing custom Angular material theme and pass that in, and we'll see that in a second. Additional components, I'd like to get the rest of them in there soon, and then I'd like to also have schematics for them, but that's also coming soon. So I want to walk through this repo really quick. Okay, so we're talking about some of the stuff for publishing and whatnot to set up. So I have it in here. There's different build rules. It's basically the beginning of a mono repo. So I have a couple different npm packages actually building and deploying from the same repo. So I have the base like build and stuff is actually building a demo app that consumes the library, and then I have some additional pieces here to build your library. And since the library is using some theming CSS or SCSS, there's an additional build step to compile that and then copy that into your final dist folder with your library. So that's all those issues and how to solve that is already done here, so you can take a look. We also have some commands if you want to publish things, and some additional things in here. Some of the key pieces with a library is for my tsconfig of the demo app, I've got this path mapping and TypeScript here. So this allows my imports in my demo app to just import at dev-intent-dev. But at the same time, I'm consuming my local library so I can do development, and just makes it a little easier. So it's a nice little thing that the Angular CLI adds for you for library development. For the theming, with Angular material theming, you basically do the same thing that you do right above here. So it's normal that you would, if you're using Angular material, you're going to create a theme, which I have in a separate Sass partial up here under theme. But I just passed that theme into Angular material. Well, if I want to use Angular material theming in another library, like mine, I just need to pass that theme object and that information into my own Sass. So here I'm just saying, instead of Angular material theme, it's just dev theme and dev typography. So there's two different settings for both of those. And then that's just the mix-in and Sass. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that theme in, and then for each of my components, I'm going to send the theme into their Sass partials. So I've got a little bit of documentation up here that you can just use these using map-get. You can get the theme and the primary and whatnot. But we can see that in the button bar example. So this is the same sort of mix-in where I'm taking the theme in. In this case, all I'm using is the primary. So I'm getting the primary here, setting a variable, and then when I need it for like hover and the background color or active elements, I can just use this primary. And in this case, I'm actually not just using primary, but I'm telling it which Angular material sort of color on the palette that I want to use for it. And then whenever the theme for the app changes, it will automatically display the component with that theme. So got a demo of this. Here. Oh, somewhere. Oops, that's not what I wanted. There we go. So in this case, I just use the purple theme. So then when I open this up, I will get purple coloring for all my items in here. Pretty simple. Okay. So just this week, Tiago Temporin, a guy in Portugal that maintains some community components for material design. He was able to implement that same theming support using the example I gave. And so his time picker now supports, before it would just always show blue, but now anyone that uses it can pass their own theme in there, and his time picker will update based on that theme. So if you're looking for a material time picker or color picker, you can check out this material community components library. Okay, how much time do I have left? Like 2 minutes? Let me check real quick. Yeah, 2 minutes and then the switch over. Okay, this will be fun. So I will have to skip my accessibility demo and just go straight into, just go through the slides here. Okay, this screenshot is from the Y-ARIA 1.1 spec. So that just came out in December. There's a lot of great improvements in it, but most screen readers don't fully support these yet. So does anyone here, who here knows what a screen reader is? Okay, a good deal. For those that don't, basically it's something that will read the screen to you, and it will convert it to spoken text, or in some cases just like text output. This is very important for a lot of reasons, and a lot of people will cover some of that. But one of the key things is that if you're using all the latest features of the spec, a lot of users are using, a Windows machine or something that might be a little old. They may have a screen reader that's like 2 or 3 years old. So a spec update that came out this December is not going to be something that their screen reader will handle. So at this time, it's best to work with the Y-ARIA 1.0 spec, which came out in 2014. But in some cases, you can implement parts of the 1.1 spec without breaking your 1.0 compatibility. So there's ways to start moving forward, but screen readers are still trying to catch up with the spec. The last US Census recorded over 56 million people with disabilities in the US. This is about 19% of the population. So accessibility for just about any kind of app that you build that's used by humans, just about anywhere. You don't want to exclude 20% of your users. So accessibility is important, and it needs to be built. When you're building and planning your application, you need to plan for it. So AngularJS material, we learned a lot of accessibility issues or lessons, and in Angular material, we have benefited from those in the latest version. In all the docs, there is an accessibility section for each component. It'll tell you what you need to do to make that component accessible. The library, we do everything we can, but there's certain things that the developer and the app have to do, certain labels and certain other things that really are specific to you and your users. So there is a little bit, but we make it really easy for you. We'll tell you, okay, you need to handle focus in this way, or we handle focus, or you shouldn't do this, or you should add a label. So there's really good accessibility guidance for each component in the docs. Those are covered here, but we don't have time to get into those. You can see them on material.angular.io. Lighthouse we covered, or Mike covered a couple talks ago, and then Chris covered with PWA features. So Lighthouse has a whole accessibility audit. It'll go through a bunch of these different checks for you. I have a really good demo for that, but don't have any time. But it will let you do those tests. It'll let you then go fix it or retest it and see as your accessibility score increases. And it'll identify components. It'll actually tell you the element DOM where that issue is. Sometimes it's contrast, sometimes you're missing labels or things like that. So it's really helpful for tracking it down. So that's kind of the first step in getting your app accessible is, make sure keyboard interaction works well, make sure you're, doing well on the audit, and then it comes to actual screen readers. So then you need to see what a screen reader user is hearing, how they're interacting with it. There's quite a few different screen readers on different platforms. There's also some very different types of screen readers, like the touch screen readers. You actually drag your finger around and it will talk to you. It'll tell you, like you're on a div, you're touching a button and things like that. And the button is, says like, submit this. And so there's some very interesting like exploration just with touch on those screen readers. And then if you wanted to do some sort of an action, they have these gestures that you take for iOS and Android. So those are really interesting to look at, but the majority of screen reader users are mostly at this point on Windows and then also on these touch screen readers. But there's also a fair amount on Chrome OS and Mac OS. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to skip those demos. But if you wanted to get a demo out in the hallway or something like that, I'm happy to show you and show you how a screen reader works. And let's see, I think I can do one little demo here. Let's see this. Oh, I made a noise.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Presenter view. Composing accessible UIs with Angular material components. DevFest FL. Google Slides. Google Chrome. Window. Has keyboard focus. You are currently on an application inside of web content. To exit this web area, press Control, Option, Shift, up arrow.
It gives you some guidance on how to interact with the components. It gives you, a visual display. You're on a button. You're on this other thing. As you sort
Audience Tools, tab, 1 of 2.
click
Table
around,
2 columns, 1 row.
It'll change.
You are currently on a tab, 1 of 2, inside of a cell. To select this option, press Control, Option, Space.
So I'm on a tab component here. There's Audience Tools and Speaker Notes. And so I'm on a tab. It's told me that I'm on a tab, and it told me the command to interact with that tab.
Speaker Notes, tab, 2 of 2. You are currently on a tab, 2 of 2, inside of a cell. To VoiceOver off.
Okay. There's little hotkeys that you can set up to turn it on and off and toggle so that you can quickly test. You can make a tweak in DevTools. You can test it again. It's a pretty good workflow once you get it working. And that was VoiceOver on Mac. So in conclusion, please remember that schematics are here to help you be more productive. You now have some patterns and guidance on how to compose components and share them with libraries and schematics. Finally, realize that accessibility tools are available to you, and that whatever platform you're on, you'll have some accessibility tools that you can work with and test your apps. And please try them out, and there's lots of YouTube videos, there's lots of documents and blogs out there to quickly come up to speed with it. But please make sure you build your apps with accessibility by default. And that's it. Thank you very much.